Hello everyone, welcome back to Get Your Sleep On with Marni from Raising Littles. I'm really excited. It was so much fun last time and I couldn't wait to do it again. So I had some people send in some questions and I know, oh sorry, got a little mascara in my eyes. Okay, good, I think we're good. Okay. So some people wrote in questions and I think others are just gonna pop in and watch and ask questions. So let me just start off by giving you a little bit background. I am a certified gentle sleep coach and a social worker, a certified lactation counselor, and a child developmental specialist. And I've been working with families for over 20 years. And I love it. It's really fun. So I bring everything that, all of my experience together when I work with a family. It's never really just sleep coaching. It's always making sure I'm prioritizing that the social and emotional development of the child is at the forefront of everything I do. So having a really extensive background in child development helps to be able to do that. I work with kids 0 to 6 and yeah, and I love it. It's really fun. I think that's it for introduction. So I'm gonna get started and I'm gonna start by answering questions that some people sent in and then you guys can ask questions too. So type them in and I will get to them. Okay, first question by Lindsay. It says, we did a sort of gentle sleep training with my youngest when his doctor suggested around 4 months. Okay, she co-slept with her oldest until he was 1.5 years or 2, but it was easier to transition the 4-month-old to the crib than it was to the 8-month-old, but then she missed out on the snuggles and all the awesome stuff that comes with co-sleeping. So she'd like to do that longer with the next baby. Is there an ideal age to transition to a crib? If we wait longer to transition, is it inevitably going to be a huge struggle like it was with my oldest? So, yes and no. The younger your child is, the easier it is to some extent because they haven't developed that long-term attachment to wherever they've been sleeping before. So it could be easier in terms of like maybe how quickly they get it, but like you said, you know, there is something to snuggling and being with your baby and co-sleeping. I promote that, bed sharing and co-sleeping, and I also promote breastfeeding for as long as you want to or need to. So yes, at 18 months, it might be a little bit trickier to move them to a crib, but what I always suggest with everybody, no matter what age, is start with naps. Always start with naps. That gives them time to sort of practice the skill during the day. And it's not so abrupt to just one night put them in a crib. The other thing about naps is if you start during the daytime and the naps are kind of disasters, you still have a whole day to make up that extra time of lost sleep that you had for those crib naps. So the honest answer is the ideal age is whatever gives you and the child most benefit. Because there's a lot of awesome benefits to co-sleeping if you like it. And if mom's not happy or dad's not happy, then that's not gonna work. That's not a benefit. So it really depends on how philosophically important that is to you, and then that's totally fine. But at any age, really, you can transfer a child to a crib. I would say the hardest point is when they're really ready for a toddler bed. So 2 might be a little bit tricky, but 18 months, you're still probably within a range where they're gonna be in a crib for another 1.5 years or so. So it might take a little bit longer, but it can be done. Okay. Mary asked, so my 6-year-old still crawls into bed with me in the night. I don't mind really because I know it won't last forever, but also how can I make it stop? Yeah, so with older kids, really the only way to do that is to help them fall asleep independently at the beginning of the night. And when I say that, I mean using a gentle approach. So start by not laying with them, but by sitting in the room while they fall asleep, and then leave once they fall asleep. And that way, when they wake up in the middle of the night and you walk them back, you say, I will sit here until you fall asleep. Now, a 6-year-old probably doesn't need you to start at the beginning of the night because they're old enough to comprehend. So if you start talking to them during the day to say, you know, this is so fun, it's been really nice, but you're getting older and it's hard for all of us to fit in the bed, or everyone needs to get great sleep. If that's the case, then you can talk to them during the day and you can explain to them what you're going to do, which is that when they come into your room, you're going to walk them back and you're going to sit on the floor in their room until they fall asleep, and you're not going to leave until they fall asleep. And if you do that consistently and move closer to the door every few nights, it should work. And they are old enough to understand comfort, sleeping well, and that you might have a desire that's different than theirs. So that's what I suggest. Okay. If you guys have questions, type them in. I will answer them. Right now I'm just answering questions that people submitted beforehand so I could address it. Okay. Jess asked that how can she shorten her routine with her almost 6-year-old? It takes about an hour to get her down every night. She gives her warning that it's time to stop playing. She closes the blinds in the living room. Yeah, so she doesn't always like to fall asleep without me, so she will cry and yell if I leave the room. So here's what I recommend for all bedtime routines, and certainly older kids, but all bedtime routines should happen in the bedroom and should be at least 30 minutes. So with babies, like bedtime routines, I don't really start until at 2 months. And at 2 months, the bedtime routine is really just like picking a sleep space and starting there so that you aren't, doing a couple things, whether it's rocking and singing a song or nursing to sleep while you're singing or, two things that anybody can do, bath and then rocking in the chair and feeding. So you want to always do bedtime routines in the room. And I really, really, really suggest no screens or electronics for an hour before bed. Audiobooks are okay as long as you maybe are, processing it after, just so that there's like some time for connection, or pausing the way you would for a book if she wants to ask questions and really talk about that. And otherwise, everything should happen in the room. So for 6-year-olds, for sure, just because what happens is you are starting to set the stage from when the time they're little that this is what bedtime looks like. And when they go into the room and the same cues are happening every night, their brain is getting the right messages, like, oh, the right cues to say this is bedtime. And they start sending the sleep hormones to the body. And so the more consistent you are, then the more regular the brain gets. And these cues start becoming more than, just cues, but they also become important. They become the bedtime routine. They become what sort of helps a child start to regulate and acclimate and recognize, like, okay, we all have it, right? We all either brush our teeth, turn down the bed, we read a book. Some of us have different rituals that we do. That's part of our bedtime routine. And so children have that too. So it is a long time for a 6-year-old. And it might be worth talking to her and making a plan with her. What are the most important things that she really wants in a bedtime routine? And maybe you don't listen to 30 minutes of a book, but you listen to 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And the other 15 minutes is spent talking. So she might need, in addition to the brushing teeth and the pajamas and the bath or shower and books, also kids, as they start to get older, bedtime is a really great time to start processing their day and talking with them. A lot of kids are just much more calm. Their energy is really level. And it could be a really great time to talk with her about anything. So she might want that connection and need that connection before she's ready to let you go. And then, like I said, about Mary's question, which is you can stay in the room until she falls asleep. And you can let her know that you're going to do that, but that but then, you have to negotiate the bedtime routine somewhere. And at 6, she can start to understand that and make her part of the conversation, have her choose the things she wants to do. And then, of course, follow up with me if you have more questions. Okay. Michaela asks, is there a good time to stop swaddling? My kiddo is 2.5 months old, and is there such a thing as sleep regression at this age, or is it just him going through a leap? So there's lots of sleep regressions. Yes, 8 weeks is a sleep regression. It's really common. But what sleep regressions are developmental bursts. So try to think of them like balancing each other out. You can't see my hands. Can you see my hands? Like balancing each other out. So, their brain is thinking and developing, and their neurons are connecting, and synapses are just, everything's firing off, and it's really, their brain's just making so much more sense of things, and cognitively they're developing so much more. So because sleep is when they process everything that's going on during the day, when they're having this huge burst of development, they will often, then it will be disruptive to their sleep. And depending on what burst it is, it can last anywhere from 1 week to 6 weeks. The 4-month-old sleep regression is most famous, I guess if that's the right word, mostly because that's when moms go back to work at 4 months, and so it's a terrible time, or they've just gone back at 3 months, and so it's a terrible time to have your baby not sleep, because now you really need it if you're going to function during your day job. And it's also a huge cognitive leap in general. So there's just so much happening that it can take a while for it to sort of even itself out, and for the body to adjust and the brain to adjust. So yes, there is a sleep regression or developmental burst at 8 weeks. And that's really just an estimate. When we give a spectrum, because every kid hits bursts at different age, but that's the average. And you don't have to stop swaddling until they are rolling consistently, intentionally, and independently. So that really means that when you put them down on the floor, they are instantly rolling, and they are doing it on purpose. And as they get older, they're going to start rolling towards things for a functional use, right? Because they can't crawl yet. So they start sort of rolling towards that part of the room to explore that toy, or to see what that thing is under the table. So if they're not rolling, you don't have to stop swaddling. In fact, I recommend swaddling until 3 months, even 4 months, depends on the baby, just because that is still part of the 4th trimester, and we really want to mimic the womb as long as possible. So I would keep that baby swaddled up tight until they're 3 months or showing signs of rolling. It's become I don't know if popular is the right word, but I've seen a lot of parents swaddling way later. And the truth is, you don't need to swaddle your baby past 4 months, certainly not when they're rolling. But if they're not rolling, you also don't need to swaddle your baby. Swaddling is really important at the beginning to help them sort of get used to their body. And it allows them to feel contained without tamping down their reflexes, which are really important for biological reasons. We have reflexes that helps keep us alive. So you really don't want to tamp down any reflexes with weighted blankets or weighted sleep sacks, but just good swaddle is great. And I always recommend just dropping the swaddle at 4 months, regardless. Because otherwise we're just prolonging something that they don't naturally need. Every case is different. So obviously if there's a baby who's really cannot get a hold of itself in space and really needs that containment longer, or a premature baby who, when you age correct, is actually not 4 months but 3 months, things like that, then it's okay. But I definitely take it on a case-by-case basis. So you can keep swaddling, and yes, there is a sleep regression at 8 weeks. Okay, if you guys have any questions, let me see. I don't see any questions, so I'm just gonna keep going. Let's see. Lauren wrote 2 questions. My 3-year-old doesn't easily nap at home, but consistently naps at daycare from 1 to 3. Any tips to get him to nap at home? Yes, you could. Yes, I will say it's a little tricky because if they're sleeping at daycare, a lot of that's part of the group mentality, right? So that's what everyone's doing. So that's what they're going to do. There's not really a lot of choice because everyone's going to sleep and the teachers are getting everyone to go to sleep. And so it's sort of like, in some way, peer pressure, but also just like, oh, this is what we do. We all sit at the table at the same time. We all go to the playground at the same time. And now we all go to sleep at the same time. And at home, especially if, for kids in daycare and working parents, it's really exciting to be with their family. So they probably don't want to have to sleep if they don't have to. I would encourage, if not nap time, although if he's still taking a nap at daycare, he likely still needs a nap. So I would definitely, one thing that I do is require quiet time, even with my 6-year-old. Even with my 11-year-old, I require quiet time on the weekend, and they have to go into their room and they can read or play. But really, I just encourage reading or just sort of like doing something quiet activity, like a puzzle book or something in their room. So you could do the same thing with your 3-year-old. You could just really say it's quiet time, and so you don't have to sleep. When they were little, I would say, okay, you don't have to sleep, but we're gonna lay in your bed with the lights off and the sound machine on, but you don't have to sleep. And I would just stay in there and talk with them. And sometimes I would just sit with them. Like I said, when you're just in the dark and the sound machine's on and you're starting to talk to them, and then I would just, like, they do get a little sleepy because all the cues are there. And then I would just say, okay, I'm going to go out. I'll come check on you in a little bit. But the goal was you just need to stay in bed and have some peace and quiet for them. They need some downtime. So, but I remember, and I always said that, and 9 out of 10 times my kids did pass out because you're setting up the stage for it. But when you say you don't have to sleep, that kind of gives 3-year-olds a little feeling of power. They're like, oh, okay, if I don't want to sleep, I don't have to. And then they're like, great, I'm going to go to sleep. So that is, you could try that, Lauren. But other than that, like, I would just, then there are other things that we can do if you really think he needs it, but I would sort of just have a conversation about it and set up the day that way and talk to him about it. And I love pictures. I use pictures for schedules all the time for all my kids. So even just, you can find pictures of things on the internet and you just cut them out and you say, like, okay, we're gonna, you can do it for the school day and the weekends. First, we're gonna wake up, then we're gonna have breakfast, we're gonna brush our teeth, go for a walk or go to the playground or have some screen time or play on, puzzles, and then put quiet time in the schedule so that he can, like, visually see how it fits in and that there's other fun stuff on the end of it. Because I think that's part of it. When you're at home, it's a little bit hard for him to picture sort of the big picture of what the day will look like. So that's my advice for your 3-year-old. And her second part, Lauren's second question is, my 6-month-old twins. My daughter went through a rough patch, but we're better. My son wakes frequently overnight, right? And you have to feed him frequently. So you're constantly disrupting his sleep cycles. How do we get him to sleep longer stretches, but go back to sleep when we have to get him out of bed to eat? So I guess I would want to know, do you have to follow the clock for the feedings, or do you have to follow from the last time he fed? If you have to follow the clock, then there's a couple things you could do. If you have to follow the clock, like he needs it every 3 hours and that's it, it's every 3 hours a day, or it's various, he has to eat max every 6 hours. Okay, so then I would sort of treat it like a dream feed. And you want to sort of find the pattern of when he's waking up on his own and try to do the feed, set an alarm, or plan the feed for 30 to 45 minutes before that, which is how I do dream feeds for breastfeeding moms to get longer stretches. So you could, if it's like every 6 hours, but it's not by the clock, but it's by, you can figure that out, then you could really see, like, on his own, when would he wake? And if you think he'll wake closer to 2 a.m., then you might want to set an alarm for 1:30 and go in and feed him. And that will hopefully what that does ideally is to stretch out the feeding. Or if you're feeding him like before you go to bed or before he goes to bed, you can do it in such a way that you're doing like essentially like a sleep feed. And then, so then you'll at least minimize one disruption of cycle, but you know, he needs to feed. So if he needs to feed, then you'll disrupt one cycle, get a stretch, and then hopefully by the time, you know, it's time for the next feed, he's up. So I would try that. And then if that doesn't work, you can play around with his bedtime to see if there's a way to feed him, you know, again, like that you feed him a little earlier, put him to bed a little earlier, and then space it out so that you're only really waking him up once in the night, and then he can go back to sleep naturally. So I would try that. And then if you have more questions, I will absolutely help because this is fun. I love this. Okay. I think I answered all of these questions. Does anyone else have questions? You're welcome, Lauren. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Sarah. Let's see. Mary. So this is time for you guys to ask questions. If you guys don't have questions, then I will just talk about sleep because that's what I love to do. So I've been getting a lot of questions about naps lately. So I thought I would just talk about naps, and then, you know, if you have questions, great. If not, you know how to find me. So naps are kind of like this tricky thing because a lot of kids are taking daycare naps, but a lot of kids are also then at home on the weekends. And daycare like turns over naps. They go to one nap at 12 months. And it's pretty common. I've lived in, this is my third state having kids in, and it's pretty common. So, and it's not developmentally appropriate, but it's what works for their schedule. It's really frustrating as a mom because I always want to say, can't you just follow their lead and like, here's what they need to sleep. But alas, that's not how it works. So if your child is taking a nap at daycare from like 12 to 2 or 12:30 to 3, then not 12:30 to 3, like 12 to 2 or 1 to 3, then you want to mimic that when you're at home. But if your child is under 18 months and like they're switching over one nap at 12 months, do not feel like you have to keep them on one nap during the weekend. In fact, I would say stick to 2 naps on the weekend because if anything, they might need to make up extra sleep. So I would stick with their almost age appropriate schedule on the weekend. Now some parents are fine with it and some kids are fine with it, but if you find that you're getting home from daycare and your child is a hot mess and you're having to put them to sleep at 6:30 at night just to make sure they get enough sleep overnight because they're losing out during the day, then it's absolutely okay to keep them on 2 naps during the weekend for an indefinite period of time because we just want to make up as much sleep as possible. The other thing about naps is that, let's talk about infant naps. So I just want to say, Michaela, I did answer the question a little earlier. You can go back and watch it. I talked about the 2.5 month sleep regression and sleep regressions in general and swaddling. And I will talk about the 4 month sleep regression. I did talk about that a little bit too, but I will talk about it a little bit more. So babies, infants, naps. So naps are not regular for a very, very long time. And when I say that, I mean naps maybe start to get, I don't know if you'd call it regular, but maybe somewhat more predictable around 3 months. But it's not uncommon for naps to just sort of stay irregular until 6 months. The sleep cycle doesn't even really begin developing until 4 months, and it's more solidified by 6 months. But there's a lot of work baby needs to do to sort of figure it out. And so do not worry if your baby is not napping regularly or on any schedule until they're a little bit older. Now, there are ways to help them, but I personally do not recommend forcing schedules on infants or newborns. I think that's that's our need, not their need. And I'm a big believer of following their need. So when babies are little, I follow their sleep cues. And if you follow their sleep cues, then you start to develop patterns, and those patterns start to turn into something more predictable, and then that becomes a routine. But it always backfires if you try to set them on your schedule, because they're so little and they just need to be on their schedule. So it's really common for naps to not clearly develop, like I would say consistently develop until 5 to 6 months. And what that means is that they go down to nap within an hour of time every day. And you're still watching their sleepy cues, but now their sleepy cues are becoming more predictable because they're more predictable, because their nights and days are organized and everything, and feeding's getting more organized. And so, you know, if they usually, it's 2 hours, an hour and a half to 2 hours after they wake up is first nap, and then anywhere from another 2 hours to 2.5 hours for second nap once they turn 5 months, 4 months. But I also really think that wakeful windows are important, and their wakeful windows are different for different ages. So if you are ever in doubt or have questions, you definitely can always tag me and ask me those questions about specific kids and wakeful windows, because for different ages, there's different amounts of time and different expectations for nap times, and really it's like for up until 2 or 3 years old. Okay, Michaela wants to know about 4-month sleep regression. I know that your baby's 2.5, but I think you're nervous, and that makes sense. 2.5 months, I mean. So 4-month sleep regression, we talked about it. I'll talk about it briefly again, but it is, every regression is tied to a leap, right? So think of it like this, like they're developing and growing so much, and when we are sleeping, that's when their brain processes everything. So if you are growing a ton, or your brain is making all these new connections, then at night or when you sleep and you're trying to process it, it's like, you know, I don't know, like waves of information and data coming into that little brain, and it's really hard to sleep with that. So, and that 4-month one is a big one because there's just a lot of cognitive developing happening, and kids are often reaching different milestones, usually rolling at that time. And so, yeah, and it can be a big one too. The other thing that compounds it is that one is when most moms had just gone back to work. So their baby was sleeping great, and then they go back to work and their baby's waking up all the time. I also think that it's not a coincidence, that I think that is also how babies process the change in everything. They go from having one parent consistently there to that parent not consistently there, and figuring it out, whoever they're with, but their schedule will often change. If one parent goes back to work full time and out of the home, but even in the home, something's got to give. And so childcare is one of those things that I think babies are just adjusting to. So tips and tricks. Follow your baby's lead. Give your baby extra love and snuggles when you're with them. Try to make extra time for them when you get home from work. One rule we had was no screens. Me and my husband and I could not be on screens until our child was asleep, because that was one way we could guarantee that we were giving. They wake up in the night. Oh, sorry, I'm still talking about that. Okay, so tips and tricks is like spending more time with them for when you get home from work, no screens, really giving them extra time, and putting off your dinner until they're in bed, so that you're really spending all that time home from work with them. And if they're your first baby, then that's really easy to do, because you don't have other kids or anyone else's schedules. You can just attend to baby and put baby to sleep, and then do what you want to do and spend time with your spouse. On the other end of the day, if you're someone that gets up early, then get up with your baby and spend time with your baby before you go to work. But I do think that to help ease the 4-month sleep regression, you have to be paying attention to any of the developmental milestones that are happening, and just sort of know that it will pass. Follow their lead. Don't try to switch things up too much. I would say just be really consistent with whatever schedule you've been doing. If you don't have any kind of routine before then I would think about starting one around 3 months so that you're prepared for that. And I mean like a bedtime routine and getting maybe your day more organized so baby can still nap whenever they need, but you know, just sort of breaking your day up by like, this is general bedtime, this is general wake up time. So let's see. Michaela also asked what tricks you do if they wake up in the night and not to rely on feeding them. So I think you feed them like really until 6 months, feed them because they need it, because their body is not their body's not regular like ours. Their body is not regulated for food. If many babies will still wake up through the night, like breastfed babies, many babies will still wake up through the night to 18 months. And that's just a philosophical thing. If you firmly believe in breastfeeding your baby through the night, then that's what you should do. If you are someone who's thinking about wanting to drop night feeds, then I don't recommend it until 6 months, and only then after the doctor clears it. But there are ways to stretch the sleep, which is doing dream feeds. So I usually, and I think this works really great for the 4-month sleep regression. And you can start it as early as 3 months, but really before 3 months, and I would say even after like 6 or 7 months, it gets a little tricky because they kind of wake up more when you're feeding them. They're not in these like, their sleep cycles are getting longer, and so they're not in these like deep sleep states as frequently. But you track the time that they wake up the first time, like their pattern. This is how I do dream feeds. You track when they wake up. I would track for 2 or 3 nights or 4 nights, and you see when the first time they wake up naturally is. And then you set an alarm to go in there 45 minutes, half hour to 45 minutes before that, and you pick them up and you feed them. If you are bottle feeding, if you're formula feeding, I would have it ready to go, meaning I would have the powder in the bottle and a little bottle of water on your night table so that you can just pour it in and shake it up and be ready to go. And that makes you not have to wake up as much, and it makes you be able to go to them quicker. And you feed them for a few minutes. It doesn't have to be like a 15-minute feed. You know, you just feed them until they're done, like till they're not voraciously sucking anymore, and then you put them back to sleep. And if you're nursing, you just pick them up and nurse them. So with formula, it's the same thing, Michaela. You can just feed them when like a half hour to 45 minutes before they wake up. And then what that does is you're catching them before they're at the end of their sleep cycle. So it just prolongs it. Like they can go naturally into the next sleep cycle. And then every night, what you do see you have to give it like 5 nights. You have to really be consistent. And I know setting an alarm is really annoying, but it does work if you're consistent. And then you, as it moves further out, you feed them later. So they might start waking up at midnight, you go in at 11:30, and then they start waking up at 2, you go in at 1:30, and then they might start waking up at 3. So you will get some long stretches, but until like, this is also just a developmental period where the beginning of the night is a longer stretch and the end of the night is broken up, or the second half of the night is broken up. And so you can stretch, but you don't want to deprive feedings, and you don't want to do any sort of crying it out or really sleep training until they are cleared by the pediatrician. And cleared means growing well, not having any kind of medical issues, meeting all milestones, like really ready for it. And also I always look for sort of attachment and development to make sure that that's going well too. If that's not going well, or if you feel like, especially if you're going back to work. So I just feel like you have to prioritize their social and emotional development. So if you're going back to work and you want to try to start stretching feeds at night, I think that's too much. I think that you have to sort of start with giving them tons of attention, and then after like a month or so of being back at work, then start to stretch their sleep. That's what I would suggest, but you can also find me and ask me more questions. Does anyone else have questions? Let's see. I'll wait a few minutes or a few seconds. I'm gonna look at my feed. Okay. So I was talking about naps. I'm just gonna go and, oh, I'm back. Okay. So naps. So as babies get older, their naps get more regular. So about 6 months old, naps start to become more predictable, and they usually have 3 naps a day. I always think of it 9, 1, and 4, 9 a.m., 1 p.m., and 4 p.m. And the 9 and 1 are usually an hour and a half, and the 4 one is usually a half hour. And that's great. And you really don't want to get your baby on a 2-nap schedule too early. So I am a big proponent of staying on multiple naps for as long as possible. Obviously, I'm obsessed with sleep. That's why I do this work. But yeah, I just think that sleep is really important for kids, and recovery sleep is really, recovery is what happens when they sleep, and that's really important during the day and the night. So I always do the nap drops way later than most people, but I think it works. And I think you end up having really happy, healthy, sort of well-adjusted babies because they're getting a lot of sleep. But if your baby is showing signs and they're ready for it, then that's fine. But again, try to follow their lead and not do it for your convenience or for what works for your schedule. Daycare is a whole other conversation. We talked about that. They often just put the babies or the kids on 1 nap at 12 months. But I recommend 3 naps a day until 10 months, 8 to 10 months, but I always kept them on till 10 months. And then 2 naps a day. I get my kids on 2 naps until they're like 2, unless they went to daycare. But even then, on the weekends, I kept them on 2 naps because they just need it. They just needed it. Some kids are ready at 18 months to go to 2 naps, but not all kids are ready at 18 months. So you just want to look for those signs. Those signs are that they are having a hard time going down for their morning nap, or they're sort of, it's taking longer for them to go down, or they're just refusing it. If they are getting really tired, if their bedtime's if they're going to bed too late, or they feel like they're not able to fall asleep because maybe they've had too much daytime sleep. And then if they're having a hard time going to sleep in the afternoon, but their morning nap is really good. So if they're starting to sort of fiddle around with nap times, or not really, it's not as easy as it used to be, sometimes that can be a leap. And so you don't want to just assume they're ready to drop a nap, but you kind of want to track it over a period of time. And if these things are consistent over a several week period of time, they're probably ready to drop a nap. But it's even normal for 5-year-olds to nap for an hour a day. So don't be in such a rush to drop naps. I'm a big proponent of keeping naps. Does anyone have any questions? I want to see, let's see. Okay. So if nobody has any more questions, I'm going to just give a little info and then wrap it up. But I will replay that. I will save this and post it. It will be live. So not live, it will be recorded. It's recorded and it will be posted, so you can rewatch it and you can watch the replay. And you can ask me questions in the replay and I will get back to you. But I just want to let you know that I offer 15-minute, free 15-minute info sessions. And that's really just to ask me questions. I tell you how I work and to get a little bit better idea of who I am and how I work. I think that also you get a little bit of sense of from watching this that I am really devoted to the child. I'm very child-focused and child-centered. And I never really like to do anything that jeopardizes their social or emotional development or attachment to parents. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Raising Littles KC for Kansas City. And my website, so raisinglittles.org. So I'm changing some things on my website, so you're not going to find as much information on there right now. So you should reach out to me to set up a time to talk, and then I can fill you in on all of that. But if you have any questions, you can also tag me and I will answer your questions. So this was really fun. It's always so fun to jump on and see what people are thinking and answer questions. And if you have questions once you watch the replay, then just type it in and I will respond to you. And have a great night. Thanks.